Okay, good morning again. It's time to begin the second session of today's conference. The theme of this session is actors and institutions. In this session, we will take stock of who are the main actors in the context of Europe-Asia connectivity, what their goals, capabilities, and strategies look like, what institutional frameworks are in place or in the process of making, and etc. This session seems to be a bridge between the first session and the third session. The first session focused on the concept of connectivity and the broad backdrop against which the notion of the Europe-Asia connectivity becomes relevant. The third session will probe into what specific policies are pursued and implemented, with what results and prospects. Okay, we will have 3 papers and the discussion in this session. The first paper deals with the issue of digital connectivity in relation to digital governance among China, Europe, and other major countries in Asia, maybe and other regions. Okay. It will be presented by Ms. Miera Paulo here from Rural University of Bochum. The second paper, which takes up the issue of EU's global role and leadership in the context of Europe-Asia connectivity, is written by Professor Anna Michalski again, and Professor Charles Parker, okay, from Uppsala University. The third paper focuses on the ASEM's contribution to the enhancement of Europe-Asia connectivity and its limitations as well. It will be presented by Professor Myung-ho Park from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies and Professor Sung-hoon Park from Korea University, who is the main organizer of this event. And the discussion will be provided by Professor Young-sub Lee from the Seoul National University. Okay, from now on, I will fulfill my duty as a moderator, focusing on timekeeping, because we don't have much time. The schedule is tight. As you can see, there are so many panels here, so timekeeping will be very important to be punctual on lunch. Okay, I'll give each presentation, I'll give 20 minutes for each presentation and 10 minutes for discussion, and maybe 5 minutes for paper givers to respond. And maybe if you have more time, I will open the floor for further discussion. Okay, who was first? Yeah, Professor Paulo. Yeah, go ahead.
May we go back?
Yeah, you will use the
PowerPoint
yeah.
indeed.
Why don't you?
Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a very great pleasure to be with all of you here in person, finally in person after these 2 years. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Mireia Paulo. I'm research associate at Ruhr University at the Faculty of East Asian Studies, and I work under the chair of Professor Bersik. I'm also very pleased to share with all of you big news for us is we have obtained an award for Jean Monnet Center of Excellence this year. And so Professor Bersik, Sebastian, is the director, and in my case, I'm the head of management. So I wanted to share with all of you this big news. In addition, also to academia, again, for those of you who don't know me, I'm also an arbitrator and a mediator in the Shanghai International Arbitration Commission. I've been practicing legal profession in China in Chinese law for about a decade. And so this is not surprisingly why we are choosing also this topic, right? So we are focusing in research that converge international political economy and legal studies. Particularly, Sebastian and I, we are doing this interdisciplinary research in China, EU, in digital connectivity, especially in the case study of data governance. Now, we aim to analyze whether the digital component of the upgraded global gateway is a suitable framework to deal with data governance in relation to EU-China digital affairs. More particularly, we look at the data policy. In doing so, we first look at both actors' approaches to digital connectivity, and then we examine the EU-China's current status of data regimes. We studied their main strategies, policies, and regulations. And based on our findings, we present some recommendations and propose directions for further research. We choose to focus on EU and China because these two actors have become one of the most active regulators on data-related issues, meaning they have more advanced data regimes. They are at the forefront of articulating supra and national level data governance frameworks, and in ways that are already affecting or reference points worldwide. Actually, this morning our EAS representative also mentioned about Brussels effects. There are already people talking about Beijing's effects, right? So this comes at a time in which both actors are changing in terms of their international roles and actors they deal with and their practices, and this is very particular in digital affairs. Now, despite of data governance raising importance, it has remained a peripheral issue in international relations and addressing data governance in a more fragmented manner, especially lacking in-depth investigation on the legal aspects. As such, we aim to complement the level of analysis of EU-China digital affairs, and we consider it's a prerequisite for development of a coherent body of literature on this topic. So to study both approaches, it becomes also, or it gives us a common understanding of their data governance framework, which is necessary for conceptualizing. We have, in addition to the deductive research method, we have complemented with a qualitative analysis by conducting several interviews with both Europeans and Chinese officials, industry leaders, and also lawmakers. Now, there is an increasing number of connectivity-related initiatives, as mentioned before, with BRI and the connectivity strategy, so we don't need to elaborate on those, but I would rather to point out to the shift in the balance of powers and international power structure changes that actually Anna mentioned as well before, but in the focus of digital affairs, right? So the world digital transformation that we are living brings this hyper-connectivity that constantly tests existing notions of structure, powers, sovereignty, and also security. And so these frictions have been also seen with the trade, tech, data frictions between the United States and China in recent years. And these tensions obviously has put the EU or the EU institutions and member states in a very delicate position where they are trying to find their own way on how to deal in international digital affairs. So digital affairs have become a relevant topic on the political agenda of both actors. And as such, both of them have developed domestic digital strategies as a part of an overarching aim of becoming self-sufficient, or at least gaining a higher degree of autonomy and becoming global tech leaders. So both actors attempt to pursue this aim through international digital initiatives such as the Digital Silk Road and with the connectivity strategy or the global gateway in the digital component. Now their aims, their scope, the activities, they are very different between the EU and China, and they operate with concepts, policies, regulations, and values in very different ways. We observe that both actors are developing their own digital strategies following domestic nuances, which shape their global initiatives and international positions. Another reason for the relevance of this study is that scholarly literature and think tank articles looking at digital connectivity so far they have been describing more what is the background and the context, or they have been tackling more traditional issues such as infrastructure and cybersecurity. So we did wanted to look to a policy sectoral area that is very relevant, but it has been less, let's say, studied so far within this framework. And now why data governance was why this policy area, right? So first, I would like to point out to the United Nations World Data Forum that last year actually emphasizes the strategic relevance of data governance policy domain. And so, for instance, digital data and sharing data becomes crucial for solving global problems and advocates ways of enhancing trust in data by protecting data security and privacy. So there is a deeper understanding of the value and potential of power of digital data, and digital data has also become, or is obvious, let's say, that it's a necessity resource for new technologies such as AI models or cloud computing. Data-related matters have acquired also a geopolitical dimension, so there are increasing tensions and competition among actors with very different interests. Digital data also generates concerns affecting relationships between consumers, businesses, and governments. And those concerns also involve many different issues, from privacy protection to store, collect, use of data, ownership, and national security. So growing fears also intensify a low trust in providers, data sharing, and ensure equipment perceptions. So just an example, nowadays with the armed conflict we are living, for example, apps have been used to target enemies, right? So for example, this is another new element that we are dealing. Now, data governance has attracted, obviously, the attention of policymakers, aiming to create legal frameworks that protect their jurisdiction's users' privacy, economic development, and national security. But it has also become a contested political space, shaping divergent interests, norms, and values. And for example, for the EU and China, they have also, both of them, issued strategies. For example, the EU has issued the European Data Strategy, while China, 7 months later, issued global data security initiatives. There also have different new regulations enacted, right? So for example, recently we have at the EU level Data Governance Act, and then in the Chinese case, for example, we have Data Security or Personal Information Protection Law. So this supra and national level data strategies and regulations aims, again, for both of them, of becoming global tech leaders, right? And in view of the importance of data governance, we analyze what drives both actors to pursue these data governance approaches by examining their domestic regimes. And by looking to their domestic role patterns, then we can understand their international roles, including possible commonalities and divergences between their strategies and benchmarking areas as well of cooperation and contestation. And because we only have 10 more minutes, I will skip the part of analyzing EU's and China's data governance, but I will rather give you some of the most relevant findings of this research, right? So first of all, in the European side, there is a lack of comprehensive data strategy in the digital component of EU-Asia connectivity or the later global gateway. It seems there is a mismatch between the EU domestic and international digital strategies, while in the Chinese side, there is actually a more coherent and coordination, clear political, economic, and data objective and roadmap in a short and medium-term perspective. When it comes to EU-China relations, digital affairs have been expanded in their political agenda, and they are actually regularly addressed in different high-level meetings. For example, in the EU-China 17th Summit, leaders from both sides emphasized their strong interest in cooperation on ICT. And then, for example, since 2009, as you probably know, there are annual meetings at the level of DG Connect and Meet. There are other dialogues, such as the high-tech dialogue and the cybersecurity task force. However, when we look to data-related aspects, the first public statement that mentioned data matters was only in 2020, when we have the first EU-China high-level digital dialogue. And so, as you can see, the representative there, when address data, what it highlights. So it highlights data issues referently only highlight this to data protection and values, and is highlighted as a contested area, which is very significant. And so after this, there has not been more high-level meetings tackling this data-related issues. In addition, we can see that so far there is an absence of a far-reaching data strategy, particularly when it comes to big data. And so that's why I highlighted this fact, right? So as you might know, digital data, the typology is very large, although we go more for personal data, but big data is one of the most relevant. And in this bilateral relation, there is the cooperation stays to a technical level. And so high-level meetings are very limited. And for several data-related matters, this becomes also a barrier in terms of if we want or intend to cooperate. So it seems there is also a lack of in-depth understanding for both sides when it comes to data regimes, or for example, legal text, scope, and applicability, which is not unusual neither, because it is a very technical and complex field. It is also very new and is constantly changing. So even for us working in the legal field, it's still complicated. So it is not unusual. And so for the Chinese policymakers, they're also highlighted, right? And especially in the interviews, their willingness and their interest in cooperating, but always through digital Silk Road. So this connectivity strategy is kind of put it aside. So I find this quite significant as well. On the other side, we have that the Chinese government is also pushing their tech companies to go abroad, right, and to somehow influence global norms, including data sovereignty and security with Chinese characteristics. And obviously this normative approach, it really differs from the European one that advocates for fully privacy protection, open source, secure, and trust networks. So we observed from mid-2018 that the EU's positions regarding actions on digital affairs vis-a-vis China, it is, particularly in the data governance, it is very cautious. It's very timid. And there are several factors. We mentioned, obviously, the geopolitical context, but there is also the debate on infrastructure like 5G and cybersecurity and the deployment as such. These controversies obviously came with a reaction from the EU side, launching new instruments such as 5G toolbox or the investment and screening mechanisms. So the findings show that data-related issues are absent in this EU-China digital affairs agenda, and both actors' digital strategy seems to be in opposite poles. So this, from the EU side, it was very much highlighted the complexity of navigating between market competition, geopolitics, and this rule-based approach, and find their own way to go through. Now, to the last part of the presentation, obviously we thought it was interesting in the Brussels context to come up with some recommendations, right? But also thinking in further research lines. So for example, at the EU-China bilateral level, there are mismatches between domestic rule creation and position of actors on the international scene. So that it seems there is a need to find ways to reconcile domestic political economic values principles and the international commitments. And when it comes to cooperation, or when cooperation is feasible, is possible, because there are topics that are possible. So, for example, regarding personal information protection and online platform regulation, so the EU should consider also this context-sensitive requirement. So, for example, the context specificity for data-related issues must be acknowledged. So, not all regulatory issues require harmonization or binding regulations, nor bilateral or global cooperation. Some countries may require, or specific areas of data governance may require a tailored approach to deal with these digital aspects. The other element is that more research and policy efforts are needed to analyze the possibilities that the legal design offers to deal with the barriers of cross-border data flows and data protection. And I give you some examples. We are also discussing about the study of reconciliation of mechanisms under FTIs, data property rights, this is crucial, treatment of mixed data sets, this is also crucial. And when it comes to case conflicting issues, the EU should reassess the balance of market and value driven by regulatory policies. So emerging data regulation and concerns such as data localization are not just a Chinese issue, but actually a global one. And so here requirements will be enforced and further impact operability of data regimes, especially when it comes to further research in international relations and legal studies. So the last one that I have here is, in order to pursue the digital goal of shaping norms, standards, and even protocols to support interoperability and open, plural, secure networks, the EU should follow or complement with a policy of re-multilateralizations as opposed to its mainly bilateral approach. And I give you an example that might be easier to follow what I mean. It's, for example, in data-related issues, in the EU side, we have what we call adequacy decisions, and this is a bilateral instrument. But for example, recently in April, the US pushed in a multilateral framework what is called APEC CBP rule system. And so now they are pursuing these personal or privacy protection issues in this multilateral arena where the EU is not there. Now, to conclude, in the last minute that I have, so just a recall of what we have sought to analyze whether the digital component of the updated global gateway could be a suitable framework to deal with a strategic field of data governance, and particularly regarding EU-China relations in digital affairs. We believe it could be a suitable framework for addressing data-related issues in regional, interregional, and multilateral level. But of course, the manner in which cooperation can take shape, it will depend on the underlying relationship of partners. Despite the fact that many consider data governance to be characterized by competition, if the ultimate goal of governments is to maximize economic and social benefits of digital data while preventing and minimizing risk, then international cooperation in data-related issues becomes a must, especially with actors such as China. And with this, I will come to the end of the presentation. So I thank you very much for the attention and looking forward to questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your punctuality. Professor Michalski and Parker, please.
Okay. So thank you for giving us the floor once again. We appreciate that a lot. And this time we're going to talk about specifically sustainability in the context of the EU-Asia connectivity strategy. So actually going backwards a little bit in time to the communication that was published by the EU in 2018, but which of course underlies in some ways the Indo-Pacific strategy, but in particular the Global Gateway Initiative. So the way in which the EU is pursuing sustainability in the connectivity strategy is still very much of interest and relevance. So our part of departure here is to say that the EU has a reputation of being a climate leader. I mean, not maybe everyone agrees that it has been a successful one always, but at least it has had that ambition for quite some time. And Charles and another colleague of ours have researched quite a lot into the way in which the EU has pursued global climate leadership. And global climate leadership lies very close to sustainability, of course, so we have profited from their research in this paper. The approach here is that the EU, because it sees itself as a climate leader, it also sees itself as a global sustainability leader. At least it has global sustainability leadership aspirations. And the Asia-EU connectivity strategy can be seen as a window of opportunity or an arena of opportunity for the EU to pursue this sustainability leadership further. In this strategy, the EU takes a very broad view on, or a broad take on sustainability. It includes economic, social, environmental issues. And it's very much seen as a part of the EU's global governance toolkit. So it concerns not only climate, but it concerns very much also the way in which the EU thinks about fulfilling and promoting the sustainability development goals. And that's very important, I think, to remember that the EU has built in sustainability both in the SDGs, but also in its relationship to developing countries, in particular in Africa. And that can be an explanation why the Indo-Pacific strategy is not an Asia-Pacific strategy, but includes also Africa, as it ties neatly together the way in which the EU then tries to promote sustainability as a global goal. Then recently, and now before Corona, the EU launched the European Green Deal. Many people thought that the economic and social sort of consequences of the Corona pandemic would, oblige the EU to scale back its ambitions when it came to the European Green Deal, but on the opposite, it actually sort of took the opportunity of the rescue and financial stability pact that was created during the pandemic to stimulate the EU member states' economies and shore up their economic performance during the pandemic. It was actually tied to sustainability goals. And that has made it even sort of more crucial for the EU to regard sustainability as a way to shore up both its economy but also its societal model. And we see how the stakes are risen when we look at issues, for instance, like the EU carbon border tax. Why do the EU need or want to impose such a, from the outside, maybe a protectionist measure, but it's really to understand that the EU feels it's now pushing its way is obliging the EU member states to convert, to do the green conversion, and therefore there need to be some sort of level playing field. And the carbon border tax and other measures that are taken should be seen in that kind of context. The EU needs to look after its own economic competitiveness. This is then part of a larger push for sustainability on the global level, and both in climate, economic, and social development. And that is the kind of broad take that we take in the paper on the EU's way or method of pushing sustainability in the EU-Asia connectivity strategy. So a little bit about the paper. Well, our aim is then, given that there is the European Green Deal and in general a very strong push in Europe towards a green conversion of the economy, the EU needs to promote sustainability as a goal for socio-economic development globally. And therefore it sort of spills over in the way in which it deals with its partners. Previously, we can see, or prior to 2018, in the connectivity strategy, the EU's global sustainability leadership in the region was mostly additional, so intellectually driven, intellectual content, and directional, sort of showing itself as an example. And the question that we pose in the paper is that then to what extent and how this transpires into the connectivity strategy more broadly. Okay.
Thank you, Anna. So let's say a few words about leadership. We've discussed it a little bit already in the first presentation, but one of the things that we discussed in this paper is we asked the question, well, why is there a need for leadership? And of course, it's to solve collective action problems and also to set and achieve shared goals. So leadership is basically a relationship of influence where you try to achieve common and shared goals together. And of course, to do this, that means you need followers and you need partners. And this is one attempt. And obviously, this connectivity strategy has a number of goals, but we're zeroing in here on the sustainability goals. So why is it important for collective action? Well, one, it can change fundamental preferences. This idea, you do this through consciousness raising, and then proposing, so problem naming, framing, and then also suggesting solutions for how to solve those problems. So that's the idea-based leadership. And then secondly is, as Anna already mentioned, leading by example, showing that your preferred solutions can work. And the EU, of course, has a track record, particularly on climate change, and the new Green Deal of trying to show that you can decouple economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions, for example. And third is to change the payoffs by rewarding certain types of behavior and activities, and then trying to raise costs on ones that one may want to discourage. Okay, so different modes of EU leadership that we talk about. So once again, we've discussed this already a little bit in the first presentation, this idea-based leadership, the problem naming, framing, and agenda setting efforts. When you think about this strategy, we see this idea about a joint responsibility to protect the environment. The idea that sustainability should be a goal in itself. Sustainable energy, sustainable transport, sustainable infrastructure. Directional leadership. Once again, as I mentioned already, the EU very much points to its ability to show that you can have economic growth and still be sustainable at the same time. Instrumental leadership is this idea of sort of finding deals and partnerships. And then structural leadership, which is using your power resources. We've talked already about aid, trade, and investment. Anna, back to you.
Okay, so what about sustainability in the EU-Asia connectivity strategy? Here, it's very much seen as an overarching goal. I mean, it pops up in all sort of activities that the EU should do. As I said before, it's given a very broad definition, but it's not problematized. For instance, the interdependence that ensures from sustainability in this way is seen as something inherently good. So that's something that is not sort of thought about very much. And I think it's also because it's, as I said before, it's brought into the EU's toolkit of good global governance. Again, something that's seen as something inherently good. But in this strategy, sustainability in connection to connectivity remains underspecified. We actually do not exactly know what the EU wants to do and how it wants to promote sustainability. It shows, for instance, that it uses connectivity and sustainability then on different levels and ties it to different kinds of sustainability towards different countries. So it's most consistent towards actors such as Japan, ASEAN, and South Korea, where there is a political and systematic approach taken. But to other actors, for instance, the Central Asian republics, it's very uncertain what sustainability actually will mean. It becomes more conspicuous that there is a sort of a lack of specification what sustainability is really about when it's tied to financing of infrastructure that we see particularly in developing countries in Central Asia. So there is a problem of an overarching systemic goal when it's applied to countries on various socio-economic development levels with different kinds of strategic outlooks and different kinds of climate urgency. Maybe this is not at all sort of the largest issue of urgency when it comes to their development. And there is something else which is quite problematic, is that this strategy itself builds on an implicit assumption that countries share the EU's take on sustainability. Then, well, of course, as we said before today several times, the international climate has then changed since the publication of the communication in 2018. So geopolitics and unilateralism is now threatening to undo the rule-based international order. And that means that relative gains instead of absolute gains are sort of a realist, neo-realist take on international affairs is overtaken the liberalism ideational view on international system. Also, the liberal logic of connectivity as a way to build people and companies together in a win-win partnership is threatened by weaponized interdependence, where the relative gains then are measured in material terms and have become the rule of the game. And then as the rule-based system is challenged by a more power-based system, rivalry and struggle for rules, principle, and international engagement have ensured. And that is at the same time as connectivity has become an arena or platform for this kind of struggle. So that led the EU to launch the Indo-Pacific strategy that we discussed before, which is more strategic in its point of view. So what does this then mean for the implications of the EU's aspiration for sustainability leadership? Well, the EU still looks to promote the possibilities for global sustainability governance rules, but that is now being challenged by China, and especially when it comes to sustainability as a principle also for social and economic development. And we see that very clearly in how China's take on development in Africa through BRI, for instance, and the EU's more traditional take on development, social, economic, and political development in Africa. And therefore, I think we can, it's interesting for us to see how the Indo-Pacific and the strategy and the Global Gateway Initiative will actually pan out. And this rivalry between China and the EU over global norms for development is likely to stay for a long time. And probably sustainability, at least sustainability as defined by the EU is likely to become a bone of contention. So we also have the response of the recipient states to take into account, and especially when we think about the developing countries, not so much the developed countries. And here we noted down in the form of question marks, so the kind of strategy that these states could take. We don't know exactly what kind of mix or what kind of strategy they will go for. But we can imagine that we can have aid in exchange for loyalty in international organizations, and that we've seen already in the UN. Playing off power, so China and the EU, by looking for short-term gains. Why not? If you're an African state, you look for maximum returns. But also the shrinking globalization and the division of into economic and social spheres will have an influence also on developing countries, which for me seems to be more negative than it could ever be positive.
Okay, we're going to come to the end. We have 3 more slides. I'll go through them kind of quickly here. But I mean, the question is, what type of impact has this had? And it's been varying. And studies in other areas have shown, while the EU is very interested in portraying itself and acting as a leader, the acceptance of others of that has been uneven. So other countries don't tend to see the EU as a leader to the extent the EU itself does. And that's true in realms like climate change, endangered species, trade, etc. And we see that here as well, where we see that some people are willing to embrace some of the ideas that the EU has, but to different extents. The commentator in the last session, I think, made a good point, which is that most countries support a rule-based multilateral order, but they have different ideas about what that should look like and what the priorities should be. And we see this here as well. So, I mean, a lot of people might embrace growth, and to a different extent to the EU, embrace the green part of this. So there's still some contestation there. When it comes to instrumental leadership, well, one of the things we can see is that the EU has been successful in forging some partnerships and investing money, for example, in electrical transmission and infrastructure construction. This is important, but as we also already discussed, we're now kind of broadening this outward into a broader range of partnerships. And the EU very much wants that to speed up the shift to a low carbon, more circular economy that is green and sustainable. And they're trying to do this by investing resources to do that in various ways. Let's see here. So we can also see that things have moved on since 2018, but connectivity and the prominence of sustainability is still very prevalent in the new strategy on Central Asia that came out in 2019, the Indo-Pacific strategy that we already talked about, the Global Gateway Initiative, and then we also see the EU's investments, the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, this Global Europe priority areas, and they specifically highlight tackling climate change and boosting sustainable growth, sustainable jobs, sustainable trade. So all that is important. Okay, we're almost done. Last slide, promise. So future of EU sustainability leadership through connectivity. Well, of course, this means that you have to, if you're going to be a leader, you have to have partners and followers. So that means trying to target partners, other countries in the Balkans, Central Asia, ASEAN, the African countries, and to try to figure out ways to cooperate. And we see a lot of these green alliances that the EU is reaching with countries, multilateral environmental agreements. And so they're definitely pushing forward, as this is still going to be a prominent part of the cooperative arrangements and the rules and regulatory structures they're trying to create with other countries. And of course, the unanswered question is, will they actually get partners that are as committed to the sustainability and the green aspects of these joint projects as the EU is? And that's going to be the challenge. Anna, do you want to say a final word? Or?
No, I think
Okay. I think everyone is happy that I'm done as well. So excellent.
Sorry for being too pushy.
Oh, no. Keep moving.
So the contents of our presentation is, first of all, I'd like to have a very brief and general discussion about ASEM's negative and positive evaluation. And Professor Bang Myung-ho, another part, will focus on the evidences we have found on the ASEM's performances. Last year, in 2021, ASEM has celebrated its 25th anniversary. We have seen lots of negative and positive evaluations about ASEM, so that Professor Park and me have developed a project idea, and the project was conducted by very generous funding by Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. And I'd like to briefly summarize what we have found in the evaluation of ASEM. If you take a look at this slide, we can see the agreed upon basic guiding principles of ASEM. Number one is ASEM is based on informality and non-institutionalization, which, however, means that there is no secretariat established. Therefore, we have kind of a distinctive characteristic of this of ASEM. It is. So it has a very big difference when compared to APEC. APEC has a secretariat in Singapore. Number two is multidimensionality. We have, as you know, 3 pillars within the ASEM process: political, economic, and social-cultural cooperation. And ASEM also is envisaging to establish an equal partnership, meaning that ASEM should not be used as a ODA machinery. Number four is ASEM is also targeting dual focus on high-level and people-to-people cooperation. It is not only official kind of meeting venues for officials or governments, but also it's promoting people-to-people exchange, raising the democracy and the legitimacy, we can say. We have found several negative assessments, but it is not easy to find positive assessments, so that I'd like to discuss, first of all, the negative assessments. First of all, we have to say that ASEM did not adopt a long-term vision. The long-term vision is very unclear. Therefore, the ASEM's responses to regional and global issues are very ad hoc. It's no continuous responses visible. Number two is the institutionalization is quite a low level. So it's leading to low effectiveness as well. And number three is we have lack of focus due to mainly the multidimensionality. We have too many agendas to deal with. Therefore, you are unable to focus your resources, your time and human resources and other resources as well. Also, we have seen that no meaningful achievements through the ASEM process. And therefore, many critics are telling that ASEM is just a talk shop. Sometimes this is losing kind of relevance to member countries, and also very low visibility. These are 5 most outstanding negative assessments about ASEM. Positive assessments, we have had very hard times to find these positive assessments. Number one, I mean, when ASEM was established, the very purpose of ASEM was filling the missing link between Asia and Europe. So official relationship between the two continents has been established. And then we found that why then, if there are lots of criticism and negative assessments, why then ASEM was able to expand its membership? Because in the beginning, ASEM had 25 countries and 1 institution, European Commission. But nowadays, its membership has expanded to 53. So 51 countries and 2 institutions, European Commission and ASEAN Secretariat. So probably that can be counted as a positive assessment. There are some values to be found in ASEAN. Number 3, ASEAN was also making efforts to increasingly address the global and regional issues. And also, especially from the EU perspective, EU says that by establishing ASEAN, we were able to contribute to strengthened intra-regional cooperation in Asia. So Asia started to find their identity, regional identity. That is EU's self-appraisal. And ASEM also can be used as an instrument for promoting connectivity and sustainability, as mentioned by Anna and Charles. And also, ASEM is viewed as a venue for enhancing civil society's participation, so increasing the democracy. We have these conflicting evaluations. So our purpose was, what about the evidence? We have to find some evidences by looking at the numbers. So that's what another Professor Park would like to explain.
Professor Park's presentation about the ASEAN reminds me of my wife. I can hardly see positive aspect, but I can easily count her negative aspects. So we are like a ASEAN couple. Okay, let me start my presentation. And you know, due to this kind of ambiguity or the negative aspect of the ASEAN, you can hardly see the publication from the academia. You know, when we started our research last year, it's really surprising. If you look into the Google Scholar, you can hardly see any academic paper, particularly in the domain of economics. No paper is found there. So maybe that's why maybe this ambiguous identity of ASEM make how to say did not invite economists to make a good paper. So I start with the enlargement process of ASEM. You know, as Sung-Hoon Park mentioned earlier, ASEM started with 25 countries. You know, it started 7 Asian countries out of 10, and including plus Korea, China, and Japan, and 15 EU member countries started. So it started with 25, and now it's a 51 plus 2. But you know, it's a little bit weird how they expand the ASEAN membership. So there's no principles, but we can think that how they expanded. I think they need a kind of how to say invitation from each side. You know, if one country want to be a member, so this country was invited by the regions. That means if you know, in case of Russia and in case of, for example, Australia, New Zealand, they do not belong to Europe. They do not belong to Asia, but they joined the ASEM. So their enlargement process is a little bit invisible. Anyway, so ASEM, but compared to the enlargement process of EU, you can see the big difference. The enlargement process. You know, in case of EU membership, the hardest, the most difficult thing is this one. There's a 35 chapters. There's a 35 kinds of hurdles, and each member country who want to be membership, who want to acquire membership, must overcome these 35 chapters. 35 chapters. Among 35 chapters, I think around 17 are related to economy, and I think 12 are related to politics, and 5 or 6 are related to social issues. You guys already mentioned about the 2018's EU's approach to EU-Asia connectivity. And, in 2018, EU Commission created a kind of research team, and they made a kind of indicator who shows the current status of connectivity between Asian region and Europe region. So they created 2 kinds of index. One is defined as ASEAN connectivity, and the other is ASEAN sustainability. But as you can see here, it's a little bit strange, if you are an expert of the indicator study, you'll find easily there's a redundancy, economic and financial area belongs to ASEAN connectivity, and in the other part, you can also see here, economic and financial area, you can see the kind of redundancy. So I think it's a little bit weird and it's a little bit strange why they made an indicator system like that. But anyway, they published a kind of this pictures showing that between Asia and Europe, there's some, economic connectivity is described like that as a people-to-people connectivity and institutional connectivity. It's a kind of simple description of data, but the time period is totally different. There's no consistency at the level of data. So, and the most strangest thing is this slide. I think this slide contains the most important information from the STI. That means this shows connectivity, is sustainability. And as you can see here, what happened? Okay. Okay. In terms of connectivity and in terms of sustainability, the best performance comes from the Switzerland. Okay, I can agree with you. Maybe Switzerland is the best performing country. But strange thing for us, for example, Korea. We are located here. Korea is an underperforming country, under the average, in terms of connectivity and in terms of sustainability. It's not easy to accept from our side. And even Korea and Japan, New Zealand, Australia is located here. Australia is also very poorly performing country. And the most strange thing is, in terms of sustainability, among the Asian countries, it's Bangladesh and Myanmar. They got the highest ranking. It's not really a strange thing, but it was published by the European Commission, showing that this is the kind of current state of connectivity between Asia and Europe. So we can hardly agree with this kind of approach. So that we decide to make a new approach, and we created a kind of governance indicator, and I already published several papers before, so that methodology, in terms of data treatment are already proved by the academia, so that this is kind of, our governance indicator consists of 3 categories: state body, civil society, market, because 3 pillars of ASEAN consist of economy and political and social area. So we made the 3 pillars similar to the three pillars of the ASEAN. And these are data, and in the EU Commission sponsored research, they already gathered one point in a time, and this point in a time is different depending on the variable. So we adopted totally different approach, and because ASEAN was created in 1996, so that we started from the 1996 to 2018, because the recent data we can compare is around 2018, so that we collected 51 countries data, and we make a kind of panel data, and the data treatment is explained here. And this is the first result, analysis result of our indicator study, showing that the performance, the best performance you can see here is the market area. You know, some guys already mentioned this morning about the market-driven connectivity, but it's true, because the performance of market is the best among these categories. And this kind of analysis result can be found if you undertake a similar approach, for example, for the OECD member countries or G20 member countries. You can get the similar result analysis like that. And this one shows we have 51 member countries, and we'd like to show that is there any convergence of divergence among member countries. For that, the easiest way to show the convergence of divergence is using the coefficient of variation. So if coefficient of variation is negative and the slope is high, then you can see how to say convergence. And also convergence is verified in markets, only in the market. And this is also you can find a similar result in applying the other member countries. Okay. So, and I can also give you some ideas showing that in state we have three categories, you know. First one is state, the second one is market, third is civil society. And you can see that Norway, Switzerland, and Finland, they are best performing among the state categories, and in market categories, Singapore and Korea. I see one of the highest, they got the highest rank. And in civil society, it's Malta, Denmark, Norway. And I can tell you that these kind of finding is conform to our, how do you say, to our common sense. But while the finding from the EU Commission research analysis is not quite comprehensible. And this is, and still I have 2 minutes, 3 minutes? 2 minutes, okay. Then I will skip this part. This is a result of, from Korean scholar. It's very important because during the last 25 years, Korea's performance is, how is Korean performance relative to other 51 member countries? And as you can see here, Korea performed the best in the market area. It's evident. It's a trivial thing because Korea's economic performance is better than any other countries. So I will skip this part. And the last thing I'd like to show is, I think just Anna and Charles, you mentioned the leadership. So I didn't know that there was such a number of leadership. So it's just when I wrote this paper, I already heard about the intellectual leadership. So we propose in the category of us, we named it here. Issue-based leadership is, I think it's similar to your idea-based leadership or intellectual leadership. It is maybe we can recommend, we can propose inside us, and then we can maybe strengthen or enhance the internal connectivity between two regions. Okay, that's my.
Okay, before starting my own comments on the papers, I'd like to appreciate Professor Sung-Hoon Park and participating organizations for inviting me to this conference. So when I first heard of this invitation, I so much appreciated Professor Park Sung-Hoon, but a little later, I was shocked to find that I'm the only designated discussant in session 2. But Professor Chai, I think he was more shocked because he has 4. So still I'm appreciating, but the strength of my appreciation has reduced a little bit because of this burdensome task of discussing 3 papers at the same time. Before giving specific comments on each paper, I'd like to provide kind of overview of the conference program. I think in session 1 is a kind of introduction to the main subject of this conference, building connectivity. And one paper provided kind of overall the framework on how to analyze this kind of issue, explaining concepts, challenges, and kind of ideas for new relations. And the second paper, I think the specifically provides basic roadmap to enhance EU's leadership in the world based on the kind of the several strategies. Actually, the second paper showed the evolution of the connectivity strategy of EU. Session 2 and session 3, I think in those 2 sessions, they are handling specific issues related with the main subject, shown in session 1. But between session 1 and session 2, I think they are taking different approaches. Session 2 is taking kind of the regional or geographical approach to those issues, covering China, the whole Asia and Balkan area, and the third one, East Asia, emphasizing on Korea. And session 3 is taking kind of a sectoral approach to policy issues, including energy, trade and investment, communication, and infrastructure. So I'm assigned to discuss on session 2. So in session 2, we have 3 papers. The number 1 is by Miss Paula. I think well, actually, in that paper, she is handling kind of a power struggle between EU and China. But usually, when we take the issue of power competition, we have more interest. I mean, usually we are focusing on kind of the economic power, the competition, or political power competition, and technology competition. But this one specifically focuses on the tech competition between China and EU. But as far as I know, that the power competition is much more serious between the US and China, or between the EU and the US, because between the US and the EU, so still the 2 continents are struggling to set up kind of the standard for digital connectivity. So my question is, I'd like to know what would be different between those 2 struggles between the EU and China, and between the EU and the US, because one, the conflict is between 2 advanced countries, and the other conflict is between the advanced country, the US, and kind of emerging country and China. So definitely the main factors of behind the struggle may be different between those two struggles. So I'd like to know what the differences we can find there. And the number 2 paper is actually emphasizing the role of EU's leadership to attain kind of sustainable connectivity. In the second paper, the EU's role may be extended to all over the world, but as I just mentioned, in the second paper, they cover the whole Asia, including the Middle East, Central Asia, and East Asia, and also the Balkan area. But what's very interesting here is I think those two scholars, Professor Mikalski and Professor Parker, they are very warm-hearted scholars because they emphasize kind of cooperation or harmonized leadership, even though they are handling very well the power competition regarding that issue. So here, again, I have in the slide I showed 2 questions. Yeah, that is quite clear that EU has a very leadership in many policy areas, including climate change, energy, etc. But maybe that the issue of the policy areas that may differ across the regions. For example, in China and in India, maybe the climate issue may be the more important, but in East Asia, maybe the other issue such as energy may be the more important. So I'd like to know what kind of policy issues would be the most important in each area covered in the second paper. Also, the second paper emphasized 4 types of leadership: idea-based, the directional, instrumental, and structural leadership. Again, maybe each leadership may show different kind of the effectiveness in different areas. So I'd like to know among those 4, what would be the most important type of leadership in East Asia. Finally, the paper by Professor Park and Park. Actually, the paper is trying to examine the real performance of the ASEM. We can find some the studies only to provide kind of description on the performance, but here they showed very clear analysis of the data. As Professor Bang Myung-ho mentioned, we can find 2 results. One is based on Sustainable Connectivity Index at the EU portal, and the other one their own governance indicator. When I was preparing this slide, the number 1 was the most interesting question. There should be some difference between those 2, but Professor Myung-ho Park already explained the difference between those 2. But because time constraint, Professor Myung-ho Park skipped what would be the best role of Korea to promote EU-Asia relationship. But still, I'd like to know what would be the best role of Korea for the promotion. Well, usually we often mention kind of middle power country or the regional hub country. So we can find some examples, but I'd like to know which one would be the best role. And the last question, when I was reading the proceedings, I thought there may be a little difference between idea-based leadership and issue-based leadership. The one, the terminology was used in the second paper, and the other one in the last one. But Professor Myung-Bak said they are quite similar to each other. But if there is any difference, I'd like to know what it is. Okay, thank you.
Is it okay for you to go first in responding to the comments? Okay, Ms. Paolo will give a response to the comments.
First of all, thank you very much for the comments. Very much appreciated. Allow me first to make a remark, and then the paper is a co-paper between Professor Berse and I. First remark. And for the question, right? You mentioned about the tech industry. So we mainly focus in data domain. Therefore, when we tackle tech industry, it might be the applicability of certain digital services and digital goods. But it doesn't mean the entire data policy domain, it's all about tech industry, right? Or the competing and conflicting trade and economic drivers there. Now, when it comes to the US, EU, and China positions in data-related issues, but of course linked to tech sector. So in the case of the EU, we do have a very weak position. And this is one of the reasons or one of the elements we can observe in this policy strategies and also in the regulation. So in the case of the EU, they find themselves that even if they evoke now with this autonomic strategic concepts or the tech autonomy or tech sovereignty, we still have a very weak market driver situation. We do have a weak ecosystem for tech companies, and not technology, but tech companies. And here we depend very heavily in the US suppliers. And so, for example, when it comes to data-related issues, we have, for example, online platforms and cloud computing. So it is not unusual that now the EU, with data strategy and the Data Governance Act, advocate for a more platforms and clouds when we can assure and reuse the data. Having said so, it doesn't mean that the intention follows the industry actions. And so, for example, here, based on the interviews we have conducted with industries actors, right? So especially the European actors or the industry, they are SMEs. So they don't have big companies such as in the US and in China. They don't have the same resources and the capabilities. In addition, sometimes they don't have the whole chain of the technology. And so that affects the type of digital services and goods they provide. And it's highly difficult to compete. So in the EU context, they try to find their way and disaggregate from the US side. They will do that. They will be able to do that foreseen. We will need to see.
Do you have anything to say?
Well,
Briefly?
yeah, I think it would be also interesting to look more closely at China and US. However, that is actually a different framework of analysis, right? So we wouldn't have to also compare the EU-US side, but think also of the China-US side and compare. However, this was not the trajectory this project is on. Which is why the good news is that there's more work to do. Yeah.
Isn't it, I mean, the difference between EU-China and EU-US, for example, it seems to me that the conflict between EU and US is about, business. It's a business conflict, but EU-China conflict could be termed as a security conflict. US-China as well.
So in the data policy domain, let's say we distinguish between different elements or dimensions. So for example, in the case of US frictions, I could say, so when it comes especially to personal data or privacy protection, we do not have adequacy decisions. We don't even have a shield now agreement, because the EU court dismissed this. So there is a friction there, because if the US companies do not fulfill with the EU regulation at supranational level, then they're going to have issues when selling their digital goods and services here. In addition to that, we do also have other barriers when it comes, for example, to competition. So the US companies usually tend to have a very big online platforms in addition to cloud computing, for example. And the EU supranational regulation is trying to regulate all these competition issues. So for example, now we have the Digital Act, Digital Service Act, very recently, to manage or to regulate, to govern this. We also are trying to work on the digital tax. Difficult to apply, right? So.
Okay, thank you. Professor Mikalski and Parker.
Yes, so thank you for the comments, all fair points and some good ideas for future things to dig into. When it comes to some of the things, this was mostly a mapping exercise with regard to the strategy. And it would be interesting, of course, to dig into some of the impacts and also how these messages are received by others. And I mean, there's different ways of doing that. I mean, the traditional ways is with surveys or interviews. Some people have also looked at the portrayal of the EU in the press of the countries where the leadership bids have been made, to see to what extent do people buy them or comment on them. And of course, there's different ways of also asking about, which mode is the most important. I mean, you could think about that from the EU perspective. What do they see as being their most important mode of leadership and the most effective? And then also, of course, from the partner country perspective. And then you can think about impact. Well, did they succeed in getting partners on these objectives? Do they have followers that actually support these ideas and programs? And then, of course, it's the classic looking at goal attainment in terms of the outputs, the outcomes, and the impacts of these policies. In this case, we want to zero in on sustainability. So there's a whole exciting research agenda. We would say this, we've maybe scratched the surface of a lot of things, and I think the questions that were asked are very good ones that would require some more thought and more research. So thank you for a nice, rich research agenda.
Okay, thank you. Professor Parks.
Just mentioned kind of impact or outcome-based the leadership, but in our cases, the most important thing was a kind of leadership should be based on performance. This is our idea, performance-based leadership. So when we are supposed to suggest the kind of policy recommendation for ASEAN area, Korea's performance are well shown, for example, in the market environment and social security area, including health, and also public administration's competitiveness, for example, because during the last 25 years, Korea showed excellent performance among these categories. And I think these three categories, you know, it is very useful, very important when a country should face after COVID situation. You know, market opening is a part of market environment, and health condition with working government administration is also very important. That's why we suggest these three areas we can, how do you say, we can raise our concerns of, and based on our past performance.
So if I'm allowed to add some, a few words, among the four leadership categories you mentioned, I think not the idea-based leadership, but directional leadership, right, is much similar to our performance-based or issue-based leadership, because directional leadership is playing leadership role by examples, right? So how Korea, how any other countries have performed in which issue, which area, then this country can take a leadership role. That was our idea. And as mentioned by Professor Bang Myung-ho, we have presented 3+1 potential leadership areas of, for Korea. Right? 1+1 is education. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? Comments? Okay.
I really enjoyed that, thank you. Can I ask Anna and Charles maybe, you talked about sustainable development and you actually said, Anna, the term itself has not been problematized. I fundamentally agree with, I wonder whether there's an argument that it has intentionally not been problematized because having these umbrella terms allows us to tick the green box without actually damaging elements of our economy or the powerful structures within our polities. And how do we then find a way forward that has a meaningful engagement with saving the planet? And whilst if sustainable development chapters currently within free trade agreements dominated by the EU are largely bringing labour rights and environmental rights in one huge big bag, there's no way that most Asian states sign up to the labour rights agreements for a start. So I guess my open question is, where do we go from here, or is this already enough?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that what I meant here was the sustainability sort of component in the EU Asia connectivity strategy was not. I mean, it's just put out there. It's not. It's underspecified and not problematized. So of course, if you want to use that as a strategy towards, you know, a great number of different countries, it must mean very different things, because only very different things can be achieved for various reasons, both because of their, you know, their willingness to conform to sustainable growth, sustainable, you know, political development and social development, but also their ability to do it. And I think that is a problem with the EU when the EU puts out such a, let's say, how should I put it, a model for, you know, for action or a model for performance, however we define it, and it's under-specified. It's not even really shown what it will mean towards, you know, various groups of countries. Then it becomes a little bit like all or nothing. You can say we have a sustainability strategy towards the Central Asian republics, but you cannot see anything unless you go down on the very concrete level of contracts that has been signed between the EIB or the EBRD, and the way in which they try to insert sustainability concerns into infrastructure contracts, for instance. There you can start to see it. But you know, then you would need to sort of you know, analyze all these micro level indications of sustainability pushes, let's say. But then I also think it has another, as you say, I mean, it's also useful in the sense that it's a very, it's a concept that can be stretched. So it can also be an aim for cooperation with like-minded countries like Japan and the EU, South Korea and the EU, and so on. And there is one dimension that we didn't go into. I mean, if we now move up the sort of level of, or ladder of abstraction, and we are now more of political cooperation and diplomacy, we didn't go into the strategic partnerships, which that could be, a nice way to see whether or not there is a connection on these kind of dimensions. So is there a real connection between Japan and the EU on sustainability? There is one on connectivity. How is sustainability sort of used in that partnership? And then do it with all the countries that the EU has some sort of strategic partnership with. So yes, I agree with you. Maybe the EU doesn't want to, maybe it doesn't want to specify it, and maybe it certainly doesn't want to problematize it, because it's also common, let's say, common good or common goal for the EU itself in its internal, communication with the European population. So, do you want to?
I think that was a good answer. I would just say that, so one thing, these strategic documents, you see the EU kind of sort of repeating a lot of these nostrums that, okay, climate change is important, sustainable growth is important. I would say the way it worked out concretely in here is that the sort of energy transmission partnerships with a number of specific countries, and also the construction of infrastructure. If I was to want to find out more specifically, I would want to, which we didn't do, dig into the specifics of these green alliance agreements and these multilateral environmental agreements that they're also touting, to see what type of conditionality is attached to funding projects, and where they're actually putting in, once again, requirements and regulatory standards. Because the EU is always trying to stick its standards into various types of partnerships and cooperations. So that's where I would hunt for the details. You don't find them in this strategy, though, but I would be interested in sort of looking if I could find more in those places. So.
Okay, any other questions or comments? If no, I think it's about time to close the session. I'd like to thank you for the excellent presentation, constructive discussion, and the attentiveness of the audience. Thank you all for everything. Yeah. So.